This is going to be a continuation of the previous video in our series about Jesus being taught in the New Testament as being Yahweh himself. So we're going to see from John 1, Colossians 1, Hebrews 1, and Romans 8 that the earliest Christians did not see Christ as a lesser divine being, but as the supreme creator himself, equal with God the Father. And so, let's begin with John's Gospel. This is John 1, verses 1 through 3. That's where we'll focus. He opens with words that deliberately echo Genesis 1 in the Septuagint. He says, En arche eno logos. In the beginning was the Word. Now, the verb en is in the imperfect tense, describing continuous, ongoing existence. It does not point to an event in time as if the Word began to be, but to a state that has always been true. So in English we might say, already existing, the Word was. Now the second clause reads, kai o logos, and the Word, en proston theon, was with God. Now the preposition toward, or pros, conveys movement or orientation. Okay? It suggests face-to-face communion. The Word exists in an eternal fellowship with God, the Father, distinct in personhood, yet toward Him an unbroken relation. So the single preposition guards two truths at once, distinction and intimacy. The third statement is fascinating. It says, kai theos en o logos, and the Word was God. Now here, theos lacks the definite article. In Greek, this absence signals quality rather than identity. It tells us what the Word is by nature, not who the Word is as a person. So John does not say Jesus is God the Father, but rather the Word was divine in essence. A precise paraphrase would be, what God was, the Word was. The grammar closes the door to modalism, which is the idea that the Father and the Son are the same person. And it also closes the door to the idea of any view that would make the Word a created intermediary. The Word shares the very being of God the Father while not being God the Father. Same God, two different persons. He goes on and he says, Panta di auto egeneto, kai horis auto egeneto urehenho gegonen. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, not one thing came into being that has come into being. The verb egeneto, which is the aorist middle of ginomai, means to come into existence. Its tense marks an event that is completed. Creation's beginning, in other words. John intentionally contrasts en, which is was, with egeneto, came to be. What was has no beginning. What came to be had a beginning. The Word stands on the uncreated side of reality. The emphatic negative, choris arto urehen, without him not even one, excludes every possible exception. Every particle of existence owes its being to the Logos. Thus, the Word is not merely God's speech, but God himself, active in creation. Jesus acting as if he is the embodiment of the voice of God the Father, while actually being the same God as God the Father. John goes on and says later that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He's identifying the Logos with Jesus of Nazareth. Let's go into Colossians now. In Colossians 1, Paul says, in auto ektiste tapanta, in him all things were created. So here, en is not merely spatial, but instrumental and causal. It denotes the sphere and the power within which creation occurs. All things exist in him as their originating environment and sustaining field. The verb ektiste, which is the aorist passive of tizo, to create, points to a completed creative act. But the passive voice shows that the act was performed by the divine initiative. The universe was created in and through Christ. Paul expands this scope. He says, La panta en tois ora nois kai epitheskes ta orata kai ta aorata. Everything in heaven and on earth visible and invisible. The pairings reach in every direction. He's talking about material, spiritual, physical, metaphysical. And then he continues the list. Thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, to affirm that no level of reality lies outside of Christ's creative reign. Everything belongs to him. Paul continues. Apanta di auto kai es auton ektistai. All things have been created through him and for him. Now the preposition dia, through, expresses agency. He's the means by which all exists. Eis, which means for, expresses purpose. He is also the goal of creation. The perfect tense ektistai indicates a work completed, yet permanently effective. The universe stands as a finished creation whose ongoing order depends upon Jesus. Finally, Paul writes, Kai artos estin propanton, kai tapanta en autos sinestiken. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Sinestiken. Propanton, before all things, asserts temporal and ontological priority. Christ doesn't just predate creation. He sustains a form of existence to which time itself is secondary. The verb sinestiken, which is the perfect of sinestemi, literally means to stand together or to cohere. The perfect tense again signals continuing results. The created order remains stable because he continually holds it in unity. All right, the writer of Hebrews, he starts out with a glorious exaltation of Christ from the very beginning. In verse 3, Hebrews 1, verse 3, he says, Oson aparagasmates doxis kai karakteris hypostasios, arto, feron tetapanta to rematites dynameos, arto. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact imprint of his substance, sustaining all things by the word of his power. Apargasma means radiance or emanation. The image is light propagating or streaming from a source. As rays are of one nature with the sun, so the Son of God is of one essence with the Father. Now the phrase karaktertes hypostasios refers to the impression left by a seal, the image that perfectly reproduces the original. Christ is the exact imprint of God's hypostasis, his underlying reality or being, in other words. The next phrase, upholding all things. The present participle describes continuous, dynamic activity. The phrase, torremates dynameos auto, by the word of his power, unites speech and authority here. Rema is not a passive statement, but an active decree. Dynamis denotes inherent, unstoppable power. It sounds like dynamite. The Son does not merely maintain creation, he carries it forward towards its ordained purpose. The whole cosmos depends, moment by moment, on his articulate will. The Apostle Peter joins this idea when he greets believers as those, quote, who have received a faith as precious as ours through the righteousness of our God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, according to the Granville-Sharp rule in Greek grammar, a single article governing two singular nouns joined by kai, which is and, designates one person. So Peter is calling Jesus both God and Savior. The earliest Christians identified Jesus with the one creator of Israel. To worship Christ was to worship Yahweh.